Okay, so we are ready to go for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're excited to have a large crew online sharing the virtual space together. My name is Jack Christensen. I am part of the team with the Bridger Ski Foundation, who are super excited to be bringing this offering to the Gallatin Valley tonight. We've got a lot of folks from the Ski Foundation joining us, and then we've got a lot of folks from different orgs across the valley who have expressed interest as well. So we're excited to be sharing resources as far as we can. I want to take a moment to say thank you to the folks who are helping to make this possible tonight. We have a lot of generous sponsors who have gone all the way in with us on our youth mental wellness initiative. Those are really key partners in this process. We're excited to have them on board as we look to bring more resources to our Gallatin Valley youth. So I want to take a moment to say a quick thank you to the AMB West Community Fund, the Yellowstone Club Community Foundation, Bozeman Health, and FICO for helping us make tonight a possibility. I also, knowing that we are all busy individuals, want to make sure we get to jump right into this. So I want to provide a brief introduction for our presenter tonight. Scott Collins is joining us. Scott is a licensed clinical psychologist and the chief medical officer at Aura. He has 20 years experience as a tenured professor at Duke University, and is joining us tonight from his home in North Carolina. We also had planned to have Jessica on presenting tonight. She unfortunately was not able to make it, but Scott, Jessica, and I have been going back and forth as we've put together this presentation, and I'm really excited to turn it over to their team representing them tonight, Scott. So thank you all for joining us. I will let Scott add anything else that he has, and we will roll from there.
Thank you, Jack, and hi everybody. It really is a pleasure to be able to chat with you guys tonight. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart for multiple reasons, for both professional but also personal reasons. I'm the father of a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, so I am right in the thick of it with many of you all in terms of trying to understand what we're doing with technology use and device usage and so forth. I appreciate the invitation from Bridger and Jack. Thank you for not outing me that I actually live in Chapel Hill, even though I'm a Duke guy. So thanks for being generic there with that introduction. But yeah, like Jack said, I'm a psychologist. I work for a company called Aura. I'll tell you guys just a little bit about us later on. But the high level is that we're working on app-based tools to help parents and kids navigate digital world more effectively and to keep kids safe online. I've spent most of my career in academia, as Jack mentioned, at Duke. I was on the faculty in the psychiatry department for many, many years. My clinical specialty there was kids and adults with ADHD. Studied that, did lots of clinical trials and NIH-funded kinds of work. About 3.5, almost 4 years ago now, I made the decision to leave academia, in part because I was impatient, and the pace of getting things done and helping to solve what I saw as a pretty significant youth mental health crisis was it was just unacceptable. So I went out into the industry world to try to do things at a little bit faster and a little bit more at scale. So that's what we're working on. Like I said, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. I prepared a pretty high-level overview just to tackle a few of the areas that Jack had highlighted that I know are of interest to many of you guys. But I really wanted to make sure that we had lots and lots of time for discussion and questions, especially in this new. And I've been with Aura for about 9 months now, and as we get into this and as we talk about this topic about what are the effects of what kids are doing with their phones and on social media on their biology and their brain and their mental health, this is a topic that everybody has, they either have direct exposure to, or they know they have somebody close to them that does, and everybody has questions and everybody has opinions about this. So I thought it would be probably a better, more targeted use of our time to let you guys, talk to me about what you want to hear. I'll tell you the things that I know, and I'll tell you, that there are a lot of things that I don't know and that the field doesn't know. And so I'll be candid with you guys about that. But let me just kind of set the high level stage and talk a little bit about, as I just mentioned, what we know and what we don't know about social media use in child development. I would be very surprised if there's anybody that's here. There's looks like 45 people on. I'd be very surprised if not every single person on this call has not heard or read an article or seen some kind of headline about what the effects of tech and social media use are on kids' mental health. It's been in the news fairly relentlessly for the last 3, 4, 5 years. We've seen multiple statements and recommendations come out from Surgeon General about how we should be thinking about the problem and what different companies should be doing. Most recent, or stepped down late last year. He wrote the Surgeon General wrote an op-ed to the New York Times recommending that we put warning labels on social media apps. So this is a problem that is really, really central in our society, and not just our society. This is worldwide. I mean, we've seen the growth of smartphone use since about 2010, 2011, and concurrent with that, we also see the apps that are on those phones that kids are using. And there's a lot of reason to be really, really concerned. One of the biggest things that people have called out, and some of the biggest sort of critics, both the ringing alarms, have highlighted that in the exact same time frame that since we've introduced these smartphones, we've also seen a pretty significant increase in the rates of depression, suicidal behavior disorders, certainly cyberbullying, things like that. Those are only possible. And so there are some that have made this link and said it's causal, because we've got these phones and devices and social media, and we've seen the rise in these mental health issues. This one must be causing this one. And then on the other side of this debate, there are people that have said, well, it's way more complicated than that. And the effects aren't universal. There's even some groups for whom using social media and using technology can be beneficial. And so we can't jump to conclusions. I will tell you what we do know. What we do know is that for some kids, and probably on average, extensive use of social media and extensive use of technology is probably not good for mental health. This is what I think of, as being in the field of clinical research and being a scientist for many, many years. There are some things that are kind of obvious. This is one of them. And what we know pretty conclusively from studies is that if we get at the upper end of the amount of time that kids are spending on social media, that tends to be what is associated the strongest with things like depression or mood disorders and things like that. There have been a few studies that have looked at brain development in kids. They're fairly inconclusive. So at least so far, we haven't been able to draw any direct links between changes in brain function, structure, and sustained use of social media. Now, it's early days in terms of really understanding what the impact is, and so we need to continue to assess that. One of the things that we do know, and again, it's a little bit difficult to determine if this is causal or not, is that the behavior and the social development of kids now it's changing, and it's different than it was before. Kids don't get together in person as much as they used to. On average, kids tend to be more lonely. I will tell you just I've never seen a research study on this, but anecdotally, one of the things that I've noticed in the last 8 or 10 years, my kids, compared to all my friends and my sort of cohort I grew up with, I started having kids a little bit later. My friends they're a little older now, and it really struck me that the kids don't have I should really when they turned 16. When I turned 16, yeah, we were MV the morning of our birthday, and that just seems to be something that kids just don't have as much interest anymore. So there are a lot of aspects of growing up in child development that are clearly impacted by the use of technology and by the use of social media. And we have a big job to do in trying to continue to understand and really get specific about what those effects are and for which kids. I'll tell you guys a little bit in a couple of minutes about a research study that we're conducting at Aura to try to get at this. But one of the challenges that we have in the field, and why there's some sides of the argument that say smartphones are the worst thing ever and we should ban them. Others are saying, wait a minute, you're being alarmist. It's not that bad. What everybody agrees on, including the Surgeon General, is that we need more data because the data that we have in the studies that have been conducted tend to be, what those studies tend to do is they take kids and they measure their mood or their anxiety or their stress level, things like that. And then they ask them, self-report, tell us about what you're doing on social media. And kids aren't always the best reporters of what they're doing. Now, surprisingly, sometimes kids actually over-report how much time they spend online or on social media apps. But a lot of times they also underreport it. But the fact of the matter is that they often get it wrong. So if you're getting that part wrong, it's really hard to understand what the relationship might be with these other outcomes. And so we're in pretty desperate need of better data to help us understand the impact here a little bit better. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about a study. So
Scott, could I also jump in really quick? We lost you for just a second via the internet connection there. So we missed part of that last anecdote. I apologize for not jumping in sooner.
No worries.
But I want to just clarify where you were going with, looking at your children now versus your cohort when you were at that age.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's funny. I got cut out. Maybe the internet didn't want me to talk about anything that was anecdotal, just data, science. No, what I was saying is kids. I have noticed a trend in that kids don't have nearly the interest in getting their driver's licenses to get out and get themselves around. Now, I don't know. It's interesting. I wonder in an area like where you guys live, it's a little bit more wide open. You probably have to be in a vehicle to get from place to place. That might be a little bit different, but it is something, especially for kids where I live, like in the suburban area, it's really striking. So that was my anecdote, talking about just one example of how sort of day-to-day social activities are very different now than they were 10 or 20 or 30 years ago.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Hopefully it wasn't mine and it won't persist. So I wanted to talk for a couple minutes, and this is based. I wanted to flash up some resources here, just because Jack had sort of prepped, and when we were prepping for this, had highlighted some interest or questions, I think, from you guys about what can parents do and where can we go. This is it's a new world that we live in, really, just because we as parents are growing up with kids who are now what we call digital natives. And that's hard because we don't know exactly, sort of what resources to do, where should we draw the boundaries? How do we have these conversations with our kids? And so there are a lot of resources out there to help parents start to navigate this a little bit more effectively. I'll highlight a couple of them. I think probably one of the best hands-on resources for things that you can actually download and use in your day-to-day parenting is put out by the American Academy of Pediatrics. They have this Center of Excellence for Social Media and Youth Mental Health. And as part of that, one of the things that they have I think you can do it online or you can download it. It's a family media plan. And there's a lot of recommendations from the AAP and other groups for that all parents and all families should put one of these together. And a family media plan is just kind of setting the rules of engagement for how kids and parents are going to use devices in the home. Like, for example, simple example, having screen-free time, screen-free zone. We do this at home, the dinner table, no devices. By the way, we'll probably get into this some with the Q&A. A lot of people, one of the questions that I get a lot is, well, what age should my kid get their first phone? And it's a really unsatisfying answer for some people because it depends. And the example that I give, and my 14-year-old's probably going to hear me outside the door and like yell at me, but he does not have a phone. And part of the reason he doesn't have a phone is he is neurodiverse. He is on the autism spectrum and has ADHD and has struggled with appropriate use of technology. And so he has not yet gotten to the point where we think he's going to be responsible enough to have that. On the other hand, my daughter, who is 12, she got her first phone a year ago because she started doing club sports. And it was kind of like you couldn't get by without it because that's how all the team communication and things went. And she's able and is, for the most part, we're starting to struggle a little bit, but started to demonstrate responsibility. So I think that question, it really depends. But whether it's a phone, a tablet, access to computer, whatever, having some clear guidelines and rules about the usage of those things is really, really important and can avoid a lot of conflict in the home. So that's one of the tools that the AAP website offers. Another one that I really, really like from the AAP's website is they have these conversation starters, which sounds a little bit corny, but they're actually really good and they're developmentally staged. So they've got different conversation starters for, just how to talk about the kinds of content that kids are seeing or the kinds of people that kids might be interacting with online. And those questions and those discussions are going to be very different for a 10-year-old than they might be for a 16-year-old. So those conversation starters that are put out by the AAP can be really helpful. Another resource that I like, this is Common Sense Media. They're actually a partner with Aura, with my company. Many of you guys might have heard of them. They do a really good job just providing sort of unbiased assessments and reviews of everything from movies and TV shows, but especially for apps and games. And so Common Sense Media, they do a ton of research. They partner with lots of different companies to try to really get as much information as they can to grade and rate these different games. And they do a good job rating sort of what age is appropriate for a certain game or a certain app, and what kinds of content kids might be likely to come in contact with those things. The third resource that I'll mention is one that we sponsor. It's sort of this is like a non-branded kind of community, but we call it Digital Parenthood. And this is an education content resource hub. So if you have a question about signs of cyberbullying, or what should I do if my kid starts showing signs they're playing Roblox too much, or just all sorts of different things, and we've grouped them into topics where parents can get on and talk to other parents. We put expert content up there. I have a little section called What's Keeping Me Up at Night that comes out about once a month. And so you can just get access to content there and keep up to date on things. We have a number of partners. Common Sense Media is one of them, but we also have some virtual mental health care companies that also provide more clinical content about signs that my kid might be struggling with media addiction, or signs that my kid might be experiencing other kinds of difficulties because of how much time they're spending on social media. So we've got a lot of information there that you can take and you can check out. So the last thing that I'm gonna talk a little bit about our clinical study. and then I'll open it up for questions. But I wanted to take just a second and talk just to orient you about what it is that we do as a company. So, like I said, and I do not want this to be a promotional discussion, but just set the stage for talking about the study. So we're building a tool, like I said, an app that technically in the category in the App Store, I think it's called parental monitoring. We're trying to get away from that because we think it's really important that the kids have a voice and are sort of part of the products that we build. We have a team panel that advises us, but what our product is parent gets it. They install an app on their kid's phone, and it allows us to gather a lot of information about their device usage, and including what apps they're on, what times of day, what they're typing, the things they're sending. We don't look at the exact messages, but we're able to keep that all de-identified and use it to understand if kids might be struggling or might be if their mood might be changing over time. And we're continuing to roll out features. And my job in the company is to make sure that everything that we're building is backed both by clinical expertise, so that we're not putting anything out there that would be sort of harmful, but also that it's backed up in data and that it's backed up in research. And so that gets us to the study that I wanted to share with you guys. And this is an opportunity for everybody to kind of get involved with the important topic here of what is happening and what is the relationship between social media and tech use and mental health outcomes. So if you go back to the kind of the first slide where I was talking about the need for better data, this is what we want to help with. We're able to gather data in somewhat of an unprecedented way. The Surgeon General, for example, has called for tech companies to share their data so that scientists can study the relationships between what kids are doing on Instagram or on Snapchat and their mental health outcomes. Meta's not going to share their data openly. We can gather those data, and we are going to share our data. So we're partnering up with a number of academic institutions to run this, to analyze the data that we gather from the study. And everybody that has a kid between 8 and 17 who has their own device can participate. The website for the study is here. I will tell you high level that what's involved is parents and kids. You learn about the study through this website. You also we go through an informed consent process. This is for those of you guys that might be familiar with research. This is an IRB approved study. It's on clinicaltrials.gov. It's very rigorously designed. Once you consent, parent and kid fill out probably about a 30 minutes worth of surveys and forms, and then they repeat that 1 month, 2 months, and 3 months later. So there's beginning 1, 2, and 3 months later, 4 bundles of surveys. And then we also ask the kids to complete a quick set of 4 questions on a daily basis. And we ask them, how is your mood in the last 24 hours? How is your stress level? How is your sleep? And how is your physical activity? And so we collect that over time. For kids and parents that stick with the study all the way to the end, they can earn up to $200 for completing all the surveys. And we just rolled out another incentive where if somebody that's enrolled in the study refers somebody else who signs up for the study, that the person that referred them can get an extra $25, up to 10 additional people. So you can get another $250 for referring people into the study. And again, we want to compensate people for their time and energy contributing to the study. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm going to share the slide deck too, so you guys can look at this. I don't want to take too much time on it, but we're really eager to try to get as many people from as many geographic locations as possible enrolled in the study. In addition to this website, there's I didn't put it on here. I'm going to put it in the chat actually, Jack. If you go to Aura Research Support at aura.com, what you can, if you go to that or send an email, if you're interested, just send us an email and say, yeah, I'm interested and I'd like to talk to somebody. If you want to ask more questions or schedule some time to walk through everything that takes place, we'd be happy to to get you set up. So that is my initial spiel. That took longer than I planned on, Jack, but I think we still have plenty of time for questions. I'm going to stop presenting. I'm also going to, wait a minute. Can I share this? Oh, you know what? Jack, I sent you the PDF, I think, of the slides. So
Yes.
if you can feel free to email that out. Yeah. I just went to share it, and it's the shared doc, and nobody's going to get access to our Google Drive. So it'll be easier to distribute that in an email.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
We'll include the presentation as well as a recording here, along with all the different resources in our next email. So I want to start by saying, Scott, thanks for sharing your time and your expertise on these pieces. We're very excited to be able to have access to your background, your research, your knowledge, both for presentation and now for moving into a Q&A section. So what we're going to do is we shared out a Google form asking for questions that we were able to share with Scott ahead of time. So thank you to those of you who took the time to share your questions via Google form. That's allowed us to get a little bit more time on heading up answers and condensing question groups. So we know if we have groups of questions that lots of people want to know about the same thing. So how we're going to start is we have two sets of question groupings from that form that you all filled out that I'll share with Scott, share with you all, so we know what the question is about, and hopefully that will answer several different people's questions at the same time. If anybody has questions at this point, feel free to start sharing them in the chat. I'll do the same thing in live time. We'll condense questions into groupings and then share with Scott so we can get as many different questions answered as possible in the remaining 30 minutes. So I will start with the first grouping of questions for Scott here. One thing that we had several different parents ask about in this form was looking at impulsive behavior and impulse regulation. So we had folks asking, how do parents engage with impulsive behavior or impulse regulation in a positive way? How do we engage on dopamine seeking behaviors? And how do we start this conversation and take this through into our life practice in a productive way? So Scott, I'll turn it back over to you here.
Yeah. This is one, Jack, I could probably spend a long time answering. And it's also one that if my son and wife are listening, they're going to be rolling their eyes, because this is one of those things where it is a lot easier to tell you guys as a psychologist and a researcher the answer to that question versus doing it as a parent. And I am guilty with a 14-year-old who has some impulse control problems that I do not always do as I say. That being said, I think there's a couple things that come to mind with that. First off, I mean, at a general, speaking from a general level, not just with respect to like tech use and social media use, I think that trying to understand and get a handle on whether whether the impulse control problems, like where they fit on a continuum, depending on a kid's age and developmental level. Being impulsive is frontal lobe of brain has not developed until kids are in their, even into their mid or late 20s. But it can be perfectly normal under some circumstances for kids to kind of do thoughtless things or do impulsive things or some of that dopamine seeking. Understanding whether your particular child is struggling with something that might be a little bit beyond sort of typical and into a clinical range, that's an important distinction to make, because it does impact sort of how you think about managing it. And sometimes you might need to manage it from a clinical or medical perspective with, behavior therapy or medicine and whatnot. So I think that, number one, get a handle and have at least try to get an understanding of what's appropriate and what's not. Talk to your pediatrician, and there's other ways you can do that. I think for the, if we anchor it to the topic for tonight, which is around tech use and social media use, I really, not to be sort of oversimplified, but going back to that family media plan that I talked about, I think having really, really clear expectations and consequences for not meeting those expectations can really head off a lot of those impulse control challenges. Usually, kids are going to need to come into contact with those consequences once or twice for them to be effective and start to change the behavior. Sometimes more, depending again on what the like root cause might be. But I think just rather than sort of winging it and having ambiguous expectations from a kid's perspective about when and how much they can use their device or what kinds of content they can or cannot use, getting concrete can be really important. And having those discussions and setting up those plans when not in the heat of the moment, not in the heat of battle. And I will tell, I saw a couple of the questions that came in this bucket before, and I told Jack before, I sympathize. I think one of them was about, their kid waking up in the middle of the night and getting on devices and then, not going back to bed. We have gotten to a point where, and this is just our routine now because, and people are okay with it. This is sort of part of our family media plan. We lock up devices at night. And we also have a router that allows us to sort of turn different devices off. But my son, I feel bad. I keep looking at the door because I'm talking on him. But he's figured out every different way to access screens, like in the middle of the night. He would go on our Peloton bike because you can get YouTube videos and sit there and watch them. The best though is when I found him. We have a car that has a digital display that it has YouTube on it. It's a Tesla. And I woke up and I forget why I was going in the garage and I saw this glow. He had found the key card and was in there in the middle of the night watching a screen. So understanding how to lock down or manage those things, if that kind of usage is really problematic, is really important. But I would back up to say that the clear expectations, clear consequences, and calm and measured discussion and engagement with the kids about setting those up is probably most important.
Great, thanks so much. I think in a similar arena, the second group of questions that we've had in is one that relates to tools for parents, which you've covered some of already here. But in addition to looking at some of these resources that you've outlined from Digital Parenthood on through some of the other pieces, we've had a lot of parents saying, how do we engage with this without it becoming a second job? How do we engage with this without it becoming your whole life to serve as a digital, policeman? So what might you be able to recommend to some of our families who are interested in being able to provide the parental guidance and structure without that becoming your entire life?
Yeah, no, it's I sympathize with that at a personal level and also professionally, because that is in large part that's the problem we're trying to solve with our tool. I think I would say that there are there are a lot of tech-based solutions to help with this. I'll say that. I am biased. Aura makes a tool that is expressly designed to do this. That get in, manage kids' content, like set limits, blocks certain things, don't block other things, allow them to request more time, etc. There are other products on the market that do similar stuff. So I think those are all app-based. So and people have their different preferences depending on sort of what information they want to know, what information they want to manage, and what age of their what's the age of their kid. But suffice it to say, there are a number of app-based solutions that can help with this and that can make things easy. There are also, like I mentioned a minute ago, you can manage this somewhat through sort of more hardware based approaches at home. on a router. You can do many of the same things that I was just talking about. But those are all those are all solutions. I don't think anything substitutes, again, for backing up and having those candid discussions with your kids about what those expectations are. It's hard, and I acknowledge I wouldn't expect the solutions that I'm talking about to be like, oh, Collins told us on that thing that we just get an app or we fix our router and everything's going to be fine, because it's not, and it's really challenging. I tell a lot of folks that when I was growing up, probably when many of you all were growing up, the parents, in order to do a good job of kind of keeping an eye and monitoring their kids, there were sort of three main questions that they needed to be able to answer. They wanted to know, where is my kid? Who are they with? And what are they doing? And if you can answer even two out of those three questions, you're doing pretty well. The challenge that we have in this digital world is that your kid can be sitting across from you at the table and you can't answer any of those questions, because who knows where they're at or who they're talking to or what they're engaged with. So it is a challenging problem. I think that with solutions that are being built, we'll be able to get some of the way there, but none of these solutions are going to substitute for both educating yourself a little bit about what's out there, not as a second job, but just at a high level, and also having those discussions with your kids. I'd add one other thing too. I think it's actually probably relevant for the first question about impulse control, especially as it pertains to screens. But one other thing that I think makes a huge difference, I've seen it personally. I know that there's evidence in the research. You've got to model good behavior too. So we can't, as parents, expect our kids to sort of, be good digital citizens if we're not doing the same thing. And if we're not modeling that behavior for them, again, in the home, when you're having family interactions, when you're out, at a social event, think about the example that you're setting in terms of your own device usage, because I think that can go a long way. So yeah, I think that kind of covers it.
Great, thank you. We've got another question coming in here. So at this point, I am going to start looking to our chat box for any questions that might be coming in live. If we're out of those, I can open it up to anybody who would like to turn on the mic and ask a question. But we want to make sure we get through as many as we can again here. So this question that we just had come in through the chat is, what is the current best practice for the balance between children having digital privacy and parents having insight into their children's online activity? This will be age dependent, but any thoughts would be appreciated. Yeah,
that is a really good question. It is also, as somebody that is guiding kind of the medical oversight on product development for a tool that's supposed to help with these things, that question is sort of central in our minds all the time. And the reason is because kids, sort of one of the jobs that kids have, especially as they hit adolescence and teenage years, their job is to be, to grow and to get more autonomous and become more independent. And we can't do that by constantly looking over their shoulders and guiding every move. And what I often say about us, about the tools that we're building, the last thing that I want to build is a tool that facilitates more helicopter parenting, because that's not helpful for kids' development. But in terms of best practice, I think it is age dependent, and it is like the question says, it's also not just age, but developmentally dependent. So you got to know your kid, and you got to know, sort of how much privacy do they need. In general, younger kids, that balance between I want to know everything that's going on versus privacy is tilted more in the know everything. As kids get a little bit older and they get more mature and they get more independent and they get more trustworthy, that shifts a little bit. So I think that I don't know that there's a one size fits all, but I will say that it it's an incredibly important principle. And if I could tie it back to one of the previous questions about like tools and solutions to help parents manage this is a good thing to keep in mind as you go and look, in the marketplace for what might be available, is to think about how important is that balance to you? How important is it that you can or should know everything that your kid's doing versus, yeah, I trust them. I let them have a little bit more freedom, or let the leash be a little bit longer. Because that's going to dictate the kinds of products or the kinds of tools or solutions that might help.
Great, thank you. I have one piece that I want to circle back on, actually, because we had some questions about this at our first parent info session with Bozeman Health before the holidays. And one thing that we had somebody asking was, what age is it okay for me to give my child a phone? And you touched on that tonight and said it's very dependent on a lot of different factors. Could you give us in kind of a short piece what some of those qualifiers might be, or what they might look like, what a parent might look like or look for as they're trying to answer that question, knowing that it depends?
That's a good one. It's a really good one. It's just a good way to frame the question. I think I would think about number one would be well, a tie. How much trust do you have in your child for sort of regulating and monitoring, and not just content, but like the amount of time that they'd be on and using it appropriately, and how well educated are they? How much do they know about online threats? I just had this discussion with my daughter tonight because she mentioned something about on Roblox having a voice chat with some guy, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute, what? And she immediately said, it's only in a group. We all know, me and my friends, they're the only ones that we initiate with a voice chat. And this person apparently reached out to them. We all know what, not to ever give any information about our age or any identifying information or where we live. So I have high confidence that my daughter has a good understanding and a good sort of education, digital literacy on what's appropriate. So I think those two things combined are good. Also, again, the trust piece, that's a little bit more, maybe a little bit more subjective, but your kids the best. But I think, and then probably a little bit of a distant third factor would be how central is it to their functioning. Not to say, oh, if everybody else in the class has a phone, then I should just get my kid a phone because of that. But a lot of times I've seen there's a couple schools around us. I was actually shocked to learn that the instructional, information about assignments and homework is delivered through social media, through not just through group chats or messaging apps, but through social media, which I found to be really a bad idea. But anyway, that in a case like that, it might be more, a matter of necessity or a matter of them sort of being able to maintain appropriate functioning. So I think those are the dimensions that I would think about.
Wonderful. We've got another question here. Due to so much current research pointing towards screens that are bad or cause depression in youth, I've begun to view most screen time in a negative light, be it TV, iPad, games, or smartwatch communication, and in the future a phone. Any recommendations on how to find a balance or gauge the potential threats?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that there is research supporting, some negative things, but in general, the strength of that association tends to be not as strong as sometimes it's made out to be in the media. So I would say I don't want to minimize, because I think that we should be mindful and do everything that we can to understand what the real risks are. And I do think there are real risks. That being said, I think the recommendations on finding that balance, that is well, I'll break it down in two parts. Recommendations on finding the balance. Make sure that you're engaged in a way to get your kids to do things that aren't screen based, both as a family but also as social functioning. As part of our family media plan, we have really strict rules. We haven't quite, even though I kind of would like to, we still allow sort of recreational screen time for a little bit each day during the school week, but that is only after there's exercise, there's chores, there's family dinner time. So there are really clear things that we expect to balance their actual screen time. Weekends, they're a little bit more flexible, but there's still sort of a checklist of things that need to get done before they can get access to that. So I think that by balancing and by encouraging them to do other stuff, and it kind of just naturally creates that balance. And in terms of gauging the risks, that's always a good one. It's a little cliched, but knowing your kid, watching for changes. I'm probably like hyper vigilant and hypersensitive because of the work that I do, especially with my daughter, who spends a lot more time on her device. She's not on any social media apps, but she's messaging with friends a lot, and I'm constantly kind of like, oh, is she bummed out today? Is something going on? Do I need dinner? And it's a difficult balance, but I think in general, like we're about to roll out some new features with our app where we're going to be providing parents insights on patterns of behavior over time, because kids, and especially kids in this age range, it's in addition to their job of becoming independent and autonomous, it's also their job to be a little bit up and down and moody and surly. So taking any single day or single data point as an indicator is not a great idea. But we look, and what we'll be introducing is we're looking at 2 weeks. 2 weeks is generally a good clinical span. And if you see a change that lasts for 2 weeks, whether it's in how much social interaction they have, either more or less, or how much sleep they're getting more or less, or what their irritability or mood or tone might be, that's usually a good time to maybe think about a conversation. So I think that monitoring those kids over time, and also thinking about it in relation to to how much screen time they're getting. So that's what I would say in terms of gathering the or gauging the risk.
Great. We are just under 10 minutes here remaining, so I want to make a note for everybody. If we have any remaining questions, throw it on in there, and we'll see if we can get through a couple. We've got 2 more in the chat right now that we have to get through. I'm going to start down here. Thoughts on YouTube? There are educational opportunities, although what are the best ways to prevent the bad material?
Yeah, so I think that one is, it's funny. I'm because I'm not a digital native, my opinion of YouTube in general has shifted a little bit, actually in the positive, just because I know there's a lot of incredible content that you can find that is very educational. My son, who I've probably painted an unnecessarily bad picture. It's interesting because I actually don't worry at all about the content that he is exposed to online, because and that gets back to what I talked about before with the trust. He spends so much time on YouTube just learning about one of his big hobbies is marine biology and aquariums and diving, and he knows so much that he's learned from YouTube. So yeah, I agree, it can be helpful. I think that the content, the bad content, number one, I think YouTube has improved over the years in actually cleaning up the really bad stuff. But I think that they're also, through some of those solutions, our app, other apps allow you to set sort of profiles specifically on YouTube and other apps that sort of that dictate like what kinds of content can be viewed. They're not perfect a lot of times, those filters, but they do help to filter out some of the bad stuff. And you can sort of set like a teen filter or a middle schooler filter or a younger kid filter, and it'll sort of algorithmically weed out some of those.
Great, thank you. I've got one more here, and then in addition to anybody else that pulls one in at the last second here, but I have a question here. Is there a 10-step process to wean a teen that is already addicted to social media? So I think a great space to start in process. We're worried about social media addiction already. What now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that there's a 10-step process. I think that what the way I would approach that is two ways. One is I would really assess. Um, we we use the terms a lot, like addiction, and I'm not saying we always use them sort of lightly or inappropriately, but I think assessing whether or not there is actually an addiction there is important, because I think that the approach to treating and managing that can be a little bit different. Sort of goes back to the impulse control thing, like understanding what's the clinical level we're dealing with. And there are it's increasingly recognized and studied that addiction to social media or addiction to technology use, it is a real thing, and it can be managed in similar ways as other kinds of addictions. So if it's at that level, then where there might be clinical intervention that's warranted, that's one step. If it's not quite to that level, I would try some of the other stuff that I've talked about. I would try having those hard conversations or the candid conversations, setting the limits, understanding and helping kids recognize how much they're on or how much time they might be spending. There's a really interesting, there's a fair bit of interesting research that, and this might be one other thing to think about with friend groups or social groups or even classes. There have been a couple studies that have shown, and these are mostly in young adults, so I don't know if it would be much different in teens and high schoolers, but in young adults, college students, several studies have shown that a majority of people in these studies say if they felt like everybody else did it, they would rather be off of social media. But there's this FOMO, like if I'm not there, I'm going to miss out, and there's this whole notion of digital stress also, that like if I got to know what everybody else is doing, I got to present myself in a certain way. So I think that you like kind of taking advantage of that, and talking to your kid and maybe their friends about, hey, can we encourage breaks or detoxes or things like that, just to start to break those habits a little bit. But it's hard, and we're learning this all together, and hopefully as time goes on, I make a plug again for our study. We learn about the relationship here it's gonna guide us to be able to answer some of these questions a little bit more effectively.
I might add one qualifying question here as well, and just looking at something you've mentioned before is understanding the clinical level, of assessing the clinical level of where your child might be at in relationship to social media or technology. You mentioned seeing a family provider. What other tools might there be to help somebody assess the clinical level that their child might be at?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know there are tools that are like free screening tools that are available um, online, and I will try to find. I can't remember off the top of my head, Jack. The AAP, that Center of Excellence that I showed before, they might have something on their website, but uh, I would kind of say like you could probably just Google this, but I would want to make sure that it was a validated, you don't want to cause undue alarm by answering something. But I suspect that there are tools that are available, and I'll try to get a resource or two and send them over to you to share.
Great. We can get a hold of those in the coming days and send that out with a recap from tonight. Okay, we are at 7:28 our time, so we've got 2 minutes here remaining. I want to make sure we have time and space. If we have any final second question here, We do, in fact. If any clinicians are online and would like CEUs, please email BSF and I can get you verification. So that's coming from one of our board members, Kat. Thank you very much for sending that out. We will make sure to get those resources to folks. So we're at time here. So I just want to say again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. A huge thank you to Scott for joining us all the way from the East Coast. I know it's much later there, so we're grateful for your time and your knowledge. We're incredibly excited to have had this opportunity. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. Thank you all, our community, for coming together and joining us for this. We're excited to continue working on this great project together.
Thank you, guys. It was great to be here, Jack. And yeah, follow up with any questions. I'll see if I can find a screening tool for y'all.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Scott. Bye, all.
Good night.